Hola, welcome back to the pod. Okay, in this week's episode, firstly, let's just start talking about these amazing honeygram crackers so they're dark chocolate coated honeygram crackers from Trader Joe's. If you guys don't know what Trader Joe's is, it's from the US, but it's originally started as like kind of more of a cheaper local supermarket that kind of just store like a whole lot of different sort of local foods from around the area. It's like a cheaper Whole Foods is kind of what I would talk about. It's like, sorry, how I would phrase it. But what I learned recently actually is that Trader Joe's is actually owned by Aldi, which is the German supermarket that's known globally. So crazy, but kind of makes sense if you think about the formatting. Anyway, if you guys are ever in America at a Trader Joe's, please do yourself a favor and get these dark chocolate covered honeygram crackers. Actually, they're actually like honey graham crackers. Anyway, amazing. I don't know if you can hear me chewing, but the crunch is just superb. Got a little sea salt on it. It's just, it is premium and superior. Anyway, as I munch, let's talk about this week's episode. So in my last episode, I was talking about obviously that I went on a holiday over the end of the year, which, as I said, was super lovely and had a great time. I think one of my key takeaways, which was very interesting, was just generally about tourism. So the topic for this episode is like really discussing, is tourism good or bad? I really am two minds about this. I am so split. I think I kind of lean a little bit more towards the negative of saying that it's not great. But then it's such a hard debate to have and to like sit on one side because you can see both sides of the coin. And I think it really differs based on the country you go to. And it's amplified in a very different way based on the countries that you do go to. So I should just really finish this honeygram cracker before we get deep into the pod. So it's going fully in. I'm finishing it. I'm munching away. Okay. So I went to Sri Lanka and the Maldives over the end of year period. And it was really interesting the contrast between these two countries. I think Maldives is a very sophisticated tourism economy. Obviously, they have like all these resorts and all these different islands. And it's very, I would say sophisticated in the sense of like, I think it's a very premium service and level of tourism that you are receiving because people are paying a lot of money to go to the Maldives. Whereas contrast, you look at Sri Lanka, I think Sri Lanka was definitely a lot more like intrepid and not as refined in terms of tourism as a country, which is interesting to observe because I think they're in such different places with tourism for both countries. And what I was thinking was like, I think tourism, it's crazy how much tourism can develop a country, especially when you look at countries in like Southeast Asia or in Asia generally that are less developed, that don't have like a fundamental economy that's already driven off like resources or trade that they already have established, and where it's very based on a very local economy that they have within the country, but in terms of like exports and things like that, they don't really have much that they're relying on. So tourism kind of becomes that first inception of like, going onto a global level. And mind you, like Sri Lanka has tea exports, coffee exports. I think tea is like way bigger, but tea exports, cinnamon. They actually have like natural resources, like food products really that they like export. But the country has gone through a lot of colonization and takeovers from like different countries over time, plus a lot of like political issues within the country. So tourism in a way for, I think, Sri Lanka is this like kind of, it's still very nascent in their country and they're still kind of battling with understanding on how they can really, like what does tourism really look like for Sri Lanka? I think that's what they're still defining. So I think Sri Lanka is not like it's untouched. I think there was the tour that I did was definitely, wasn't super well carved out when I was researching, but like from reading a few different blogs, I was able to understand like what are the main areas to see and what to do. And so I was informed by other tourists that have been there. Something interesting I came across though in Sri Lanka was there was a very mixed influence of, I guess I'm going to put it in like quotation, air quotations with my fingers, like tourism. So in South Sri Lanka, so down by the beach, which has like also encountered a lot of like war and like, I guess like that's the area that gets invaded. But in the south, there is a lot there's some beautiful beaches. And it's really interesting, like going there, it was like very early stage Bali. They even had like cafes there that the other branch that the cafe had was in Lombok, Indonesia, which was super interesting. And I was like, oh my God, because I really felt like when I was there, I was like, oh, this feels like a small Bali. Not necessarily a good thing. I'll just call out now. But yeah, it was interesting to see that it was kind of just this like tinkering towards being a small Bali, very early stages. What was interesting though, other than that, was that there was a very large influx of Russians that were living in the south of Sri Lanka. And I think I watched this video on YouTube like before I went as well, and I heard that there were quite a lot of Russians also up north in Jaffna, which I didn't go to. But when I was walking around the restaurants and like walking down one of these main streets, it was kind of like one of those like long like streets that traverse through the city, similar to what you would see in Bali if you've been, or like maybe in Europe if you like one of those like main streets essentially of this town. There was a lot of Russian language like written everywhere on like signs. It would be in English and like Sri Lankan and then Russian. And I think English is like, not to say this in an entitled way as I am an English speaker, but I think English is like a standardized language, probably because most countries have been invaded by an English-speaking country, but also just like English is not that it's actually the most not that it's actually the most widely spoken language in the world, but it is kind of like a global language. So you just see English everywhere. Anyway, but it was interesting to see the Russian because I was like, oh, that means that there's a large influx of like Russians that are living here. And I was thinking, oh, okay, like I wonder when did that happen? What is the context of why Russian people are like why are they living in Sri Lanka of all places? And I was thinking, maybe it's to do with like the Ukraine and Russia war, and then Russians, maybe they got sanctioned for a lot of countries, but Sri Lanka. Anyway, so I read a few articles, and it turns out, like my assumption was more or less correct, that there were quite a lot of Russians that came into Sri Lanka because it was one of the only countries that was open for them, and still maybe is, but have then now extended their visas to be there indefinitely. And so they came on a tourism visa, and then the government has kind of turned a blind eye to them being in the country on, I guess, a strict visa. But what is interesting, like I think that like whatever, that's like not something that I can control, but what I found interesting as a tourist there is that there was this weird dynamic between the locals and the Russians. And when you read articles as well, some of them are biased, like obviously from different parties, but there was definitely a takeover of certain businesses and like fully functioning, fully owned bar that's just completely owned by Russians, selling Russian food, Russian drinks, and no Sri Lankan at all. And I found that so interesting because I was like, oh, like fancy just coming to another country and then just setting up your own establishment of your own culture. But then I was like, I guess that's kind of similar to maybe the idea of a Chinatown or a India town or, a Greek town in Melbourne that you might find. But it was just kind of like, it was just a bit, I guess, jolting to see because you wouldn't really naturally see that. Anyway, so this whole, I guess, so there was that encounter that happened, but there was also the second encounter, which was I went to Yala, which is one of the national parks in Sri Lanka. So there's like 3 main ones, but Yala is one of them. And we decided to go to Yala because apparently there's like more diversity in wildlife. Going into that, I had read about it and I saw that, there was these safari tours that you can go on. And I was like, okay, cool, like that'd be interesting to go do. But I had read that, mixed reviews. Like some people were like, oh, it's so great, it's all these animals. Some people were like, oh, it was like the jeeps were kind of just like too many of them. And I had heard locals kind of talking about how there was like a lack of regulation. I think sometimes you read these things and you're like, I don't really know like the degree to which this is an issue. But I'll tell you it's an issue because so we went to Yala, and I would say I would not recommend anyone to go to Yala, which I think is a sad comment for me to make as a tourist, and probably not what they would like. The intention or the desired outcome of my experience there would not be for me not recommend to go to Yala. But I wouldn't go back to Yala unless they seriously changed regulation there on how they are taking tourists into that park. And I think it was very sad because essentially, you had about 100 or more of these Jeep kind of vehicles where it was like a ute, like a pickup truck, and then at the back there were 6 seats for guests. We were 2 people in one car. We thought that we were going to be 6, which would be better because then you have less cars on the road. But anyway, there were so many groups of 2, and I think these companies obviously compete and don't talk to each other, don't share business. But I think fundamentally they weren't looking out for the best interests of the park or the environment or the guest experience. So you have 100 of these Jeeps in the same area trying to find animals in a very highly vegetated area. And then you would literally we're at this fork in this road, and this car, our driver turned to the right and saw that there was all these cars. And then there was literally a traffic jam, and decided to proceed to drive into that. And I was like, wait, why? And then all these cars ended up backing up. It was just we were stuck in traffic for 30 minutes in a national park. That is just unheard of. And it made me sad because it made me realize I feel the people here are not and the government and local authorities are not caring about this park and how to, preserve this park and create a good experience that is good for the country, the animals, and tourists, right? And I think that the priority order should be animals, the country, and then tourists. And it made me feel when you are in a country like Sri Lanka that is underdeveloped, that where tourism is such a new hot opportunity, how much are you willing to give up of the country and the preservation of it to make money, essentially? And that's where it really sparked my thoughts and made me really feel is this good or bad? I think in Asia, I see a lot of negative implications of having such highly saturated tourism. For me, Thailand is a huge one. I actually have no issue with the country at all. I just think it's the tourism and how they've managed it. Thailand is just overly touristy for me. I think awesome country, great things to see, awesome food, but I find it very suffocating when I'm there because there's just so many tourists and all kinds of tourists, you know what I mean? And everybody's there with different intentions. And sometimes I think for me, I don't really align with some other people's intentions of being there, which shouldn't be any of my business. But I mean, fundamentally, I'm a human. I'm affected by my environment. So yeah, I think Thailand is just preferably wouldn't love to tour there often as a tourist. I think it'd be cool to go with a local. I think that would be a great experience. But yeah, Thailand is a country that I feel there's a lot of negative repercussions of tourism, and maybe it's over commercialization of tourism, where a cultural experience is no longer a cultural experience. It's actually just built for pure tourism. And that for me is the saddest thing to see, is when you used to have a cultural tradition or something that you used to do, but then now because of tourism you've oversold that, you've over-commercialized that, and there's no authenticity to that cultural experience anymore. That's what I find really sad. And unfortunately, this whole over-commercialization that's fed through tourism filters into food as well. And I'm a huge foodie, but I find even in Japan, as soon as a restaurant has a Michelin star or a Michelin guide, it just ruins the fun for everybody, because these restaurants become overcrowded, everyone wants to go there. And I honestly think that the food quality, as soon as they get that recognition, just drops. Even though it's great for the restaurant, it just the quality drops because they can't handle maybe the amount of traffic they're getting. They get too focused on pushing so many people through that restaurant versus the honor of actually serving that dish and having love. So there's just so many, I feel spin-offs that affect an overall experience for somebody, especially for me, I maybe, because I've traveled quite a lot, I'm quite sensitive to that. And maybe if you haven't like traveled too frequently before, you wouldn't feel it as much. But because I've seen quite a few places, I feel like I'm quite sensitive to it. The last place that I would just call out that I've been seeing recently, that's just like, I mean, I've been there twice in the last year. One for a wedding, and the other time was it also for a wedding? Oh, I think it was because we were in the area, so we were like, why don't we just take a short trip there, which is Bali. I used to go to Bali a lot when I was young with my family, so maybe like 20 years ago or more. And I hadn't gone since I was like, and then I went one more time when I was like 13, and I hadn't been since then. So I had no expectation of Bali, and I remember it being like such a quiet, like a chill, fun place to be in. But going back to Bali, and now it's just so sad because Bali as a place is so great. Food, people, culture, amazing. But once again, the amount of tourism they have there and lack of regulation that they have has just like, I honestly think has ruined the country. Like not Bali, not a country, but like that area. The amount of reels that I've seen this Christmas of like Bali and the traffic is just, it's just horrifying because you have like, honestly, you have like hundreds of scooters and all of these cars trying to get into one space at one time. It's just like unreal to see. And it's sad because this place is obviously not built for this much traffic, but they're just like brute forcing their way through. And it makes me feel like, no one or like in the country actually looking out for the longevity of this country and like how to preserve it? No, I don't think so. So all of this makes me feel like, how can I be more meaningful and intentional about my tourism and how I show up as a tourist somewhere, such that, you know, I help preserve the place, I help preserve the local economy, I help them to not, I mean, I'm only one person, but try in some way to make a positive impact so that the country doesn't feel like they have to like so blatantly bastardize some of like the traditions and cultures and experiences that they have in the country. And I was speaking to like my auntie's friend that I met up with in Sri Lanka, and she was saying she was really saddened by like, you know, and very mindful of where Sri Lanka's going in terms of tourism, how much they're caving into certain experiences. She's like, you know, tourism's so great, but she's like, but how do you manage that? And like, yeah, it really got me thinking. And she was like, oh, you know, do you make it like Bhutan, which is, Bhutan requires you to have like a local citizen or someone invite you to the country, and they charge you really high price to get in, but you go in with, I guess, you get that privilege to go to that country and see them in their full form, living and, you know, observe their cultures, and you're being a guest in that country versus going in with this like privilege of I'm a tourist and I'm here to like fund your economy, which I think is kind of the mentality that's kind of screwing up everything nowadays, is that this entitlement that people have when they go traveling, that, oh, I'm paying for it, therefore I should get whatever I want. But actually, it's like you're paying to be a guest in that country like you would go to someone's house. You wouldn't go and like shit on it and ruin it and make it bad if you went to somebody's house. You would go there and you would respect the country that you're in, and you would try the new things that they have in their home because you're there to explore and discover. Where I feel like nowadays, a lot of people, they go to a country expecting to find things the way it is at home for them, and then scoff when it's not the service level or, you know, the food that they want. But for me, I'm like, fundamentally, that is the whole idea about traveling, is to go and explore new cultures, learn from different environments, see something out of the ordinary from what you're used to at home. So what's the point of going all the way to Bhutan, which I'm pretty sure they don't have McDonald's, but going there and like going and eating at all these global places that you could eat at home? For me, that's completely pointless. But once again, I mean, I don't want to do that you do you thing, but I see how people have different views of like, oh, why they travel. But for me, it's just not it. Like, I think it's just sad, and I'm not like into it at all. So yeah, going back to that point, it's like, do you mitigate this by having a very high barrier of entry to the country? Potentially, yes. Maybe that's a good recommendation for these new, like, underdeveloped countries, that a good way for them to, you know, regulate and preserve their identity and manage, you know, the flow of tourists into that country so that it doesn't lose its own identity. I think it's all about, like, flow and movement of people and protection, like regulations around, like, protecting the natural treasures that the country has, cultures. I think that is on the and that's also the responsibility of the country itself. But, you know, that becomes like a very big picture discussion around, like, politics and money and those situations. My second discussion point on this topic is, like, around language. I was watching this reel, and I'll talk about this briefly, but I saw this reel of this guy interviewing French people in France about why do you not like it when Americans come to France and speak English? And they were like, well, French people in the video were like, well, when you're in America, right? And I speak French, so you should speak French. But then the guy was like, but when you go to America, do you speak English or French? He's like, I speak English. He's like, okay, but you, like, I guess what he was trying to say is, like, you know English. English is a more commonly known language. He's like, okay, what do you go to Italy? Do you speak Italian? And they were like, well, no. And I think at this whole language point, I get what they're saying. It's like, you're in my country, we speak French, so you should attempt to speak the language somehow. Totally agree, but also languages are hard. And not everybody has the ability to learn the language. But also the whole idea of, like, tourism and traveling is, like, yeah, obviously you're not going to speak every language that you go to, like, you're not going to speak the language of every country you go to. But it's all about, like, you as a tourist trying your best to communicate with a local person, but those local people also accepting that you're not going to be able to speak to their language and having an open mind to helping and being nice to you. I think taking that ignorant view of, like, oh, you don't speak my language, so, like, I'm not going to help you, which I do really, like, I've been to France a few times and I can promise you they definitely have that arrogance, is not a nice way to enter a country or be invited into a country. So I think that, yes, it could be ignorant to think that you could just speak your language and someone will speak back to you, but try your best at the local language, you know, like, try a few, like, basic things and then learn and be, you know, genuine about trying to learn and speak to people. But if you can't, it's fine. And you on the receiving end as a local should be okay with that, because it's not like I'm going to be like, you know, if a Korean person came to Melbourne, I wouldn't be like, why can't you speak English fluently? Like, that's just rude. Anyway. Okay, my third discussion point is around another factor that I think really impacts tourism now is bloody social media. Of course, the hot topic on everyone's mind all the time. But I think since COVID, we've seen, like, just this amplification of, like, social media and, like, travel on social media. And it's great. Like, people are, you know, free to finally, like, move around. People were stuck at home for so long, so they're all playing catch up. But I feel that there's also a requirement for a regulation on, like, social media. And I don't know how you do it, but, like, some sort of management of, like, okay, don't just, like, build an experience for a tourist because of social media. You know, the amount of tours that I've seen, it's like good Instagram spots or, like, good photo spots, or, oh, you go here, this is, like, really Instagrammable. Like, people literally, I feel like, travel just to take Instagram photos nowadays, which is just wild. And Alex made a good point when we were in Sri Lanka. We went to see, like, the Nine Arch Bridge, and he's like, I just don't know if these people are here to, like, see this site, or they're here to just take a photo, because literally everyone's taking a photo. And I think, like, not saying you can't take a photo, but what is your ratio between enjoying the site versus taking the photo? You know what I mean? Like, if you didn't get the photo, is it really going to inhibit your experience? When I was in Bali, I went on this photo tour, which honestly, I actually didn't really think that was what I was signing up for. My intention was, we're going to Bali. I was like, oh, why don't we get some nice, like, couple photos? So I wanted to hire a photographer. And then when I was, like, on Airbnb, I ended up finding out that you could, like, hire a photographer through Airbnb Experiences. But then they were like, we'll take you to these locations. But then, anyway, it turned out to be like a whole day of like driving around taking photos at all these different places. But I was like really naive, and I thought that it was just like a super unknown thing to do, not that many people were doing it. I was very like rudely awakened to like lines at waterfalls, lines at photo spots, and I was like, what is this? I would never do that again or anything like that, because it was not really like who I am as a tourist or as a person, and I don't really like want to support that. Obviously it helps locals, they get paid, but literally everyone would just rock up, take a photo and walk off, and there's just so many people there waiting in line. It was just a very unpleasant experience, and not the trajectory that I think that tourism should continue to go in. So what I'm saying is, I guess my recap is that I feel like generally in life, there's like this general shift away from individuality and creativity. You know, people think they are being super creative in this, like all these avenues of social media and stuff, but they're not really. They're just seeing what other people do and then they go and do the same thing. So, you know, there's this like overwhelming trend that's happening in the world and just socially. So I would say, like, with tourism, I would love to see people continue to try and be a bit individualistic in how they tour. Like, obviously you're going to read like tour guides and blogs on what to do. That makes sense, sure. But when you're actually in the country, like, be present. You know what I mean? Like, I think there are a few things that come to mind for me of how, as a tourist personally, that I am going to show up and how I would recommend others, is to really be more mindful of how you're showing up in that country and more intentional. So like book local hotels, book boutique hotels. Some of my favorite things I did in Sri Lanka was like stay at home stays. That was so cute and so fun, like getting to know local people, staying in their like home environments. Awesome. Something you can't do at home. I think supporting local tourism is really important, like, you know, local tour guides, local cooking classes, go in there and learn about their actual culture. I really enjoyed, like, something memorable for me is like when I did a cooking class in Vietnam, and it was great. I learned all these dishes. It was a very long, tiring cooking class, like 6 hours, but it was so fun. It just felt like something different, you know what I mean? I think read about the country and do research before you go. Like, I think it's great to watch like a YouTube video on the history of a country before you go, so you actually understand the context of, like, you know, were they invaded? Were they not invaded? How did they become like this? How did their language form? Like, it's just interesting to know these things when you go to a country, so you have context and then you are actually immersing yourself in their environment. I also think, like, go traveling with an open mind. Like, everybody has their own beliefs, expectations, like routines, habits, right? But when you're going to another country, I feel like it's very obnoxious and entitled to go there with your expectation that everything that you want and that you're used to is going to be offered by that country, because it's definitely not going to be, right? That's the whole essence of the world, is that everybody's different. All these countries are super different culturally, like religiously, I don't know, just like fundamentally, there's so many social norms that are just so different in a country, which is what makes it interesting. So I feel like you should focus on immersing yourself in that and really learning from it. Anyway, these were my takeaways from my holiday recently. I would overall say that I think tourism is on a negative trend at the moment. I don't really love the general approach to tourism at the moment from people. But what I can control is myself, so I'm going to continue to be more mindful and intentional when I travel, and making sure that I really am showing up to be present and see the country, and not, you know, there are moments when I may feel like, oh, like, why don't they have this? But it's just a reminder of like why you're there and staying present. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Bye.